So hello once again. I'm very happy to have you here, and it would be really nice to hear your story, how you became who you are, uh, what struggles you went through, and to learn a little bit from your experience and share it with others. So
Sure.
could you please tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I am Beth Massi. I am the Director of Product Marketing for the .NET platform at Microsoft. I'm also on the Board of Directors for the .NET Foundation. And I guess I've been at Microsoft for a while, like since 2007 is when I started as a full-time employee. I was a Microsoft MVP before that. And before that, I actually worked at Microsoft as a vendor on the Visual Fox Pro team. So I even before .NET was invented, I was involved in the Microsoft ecosystem. So it was, I think the way that I ended up at Microsoft was a lot had to do with the community. A lot had to do with, others helping me learn, and especially the first programming community as I came out of college. So um, I learned to give back because I received so much from the community, learning that I gave back and continued to do that through most of my career. When I started Microsoft, I joined as a full-time employee. I joined as the community manager for Visual Basic. So I was working on Visual Basic, .NET. So um, I guess we could start with challenges. You mentioned challenges. There's a lot
Yeah,
of challenges.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So, how did it start how did you end up with what was your first programming job basically?
My first programming job out of college, because I started programming when I was about 8 years old, like in basic. And then I learned Pascal and in high school. And then in college, yeah, I decided to go to get a computer science degree in college. So I learned a lot of different languages then. Um, this is all before .NET has even existed.
Mm-hmm.
So I graduated college in 1994. Okay, so even before Java. So Java was just kind of in its infancy as well. So I learned a lot of C and C++. Um, so my dream job was actually working like in Lawrence Livermore Laboratory and being like a C++ developer and more scientific because my parents are scientists, so like real scientists, not computer
Yeah.
scientists. Um, and but I ended up graduating with a computer science degree and wanted to kind of take the summer off, living with my parents. And my mom would have none of that. She wanted me to go get a job. So she found this job in, a couple towns down that built medical software. So they built, software for health insurance companies and hospitals and things. And they were using this programming language called Clipper. Okay, so Clipper
Okay.
was a D-based language. Yeah. Clipper and FoxPro had a lot in common, actually. So this is how I kind of ended up in the FoxPro community. So my first real paid programming job was writing, like I didn't even know what a database was at the time because I didn't learn that in school. I learned more programming concepts than databases. But I picked it up really fast and convinced the company to move to FoxPro because Clipper at the time was only like a DOS-based kind of interface, a modal DOS-based interface. So moving to FoxPro, we were able to use Windows and Mac, and so FoxPro was multi-platform, so it could use DOS, it could use Unix, it could use Mac at the time and Windows. So that was like my first job. I actually have to say it was a great job. I was there for, probably 6, 7 years. I ended up becoming like the lead development lead for the team for the company. It was a small company. We got bought by another company and
Yeah.
then we all left. But at that time, I moved to New York and worked, in consulting companies. So I got to work in a bunch of different industries. And this is also right around the turn of the century. So it was like .NET was like just in alpha and releases. And that company was very involved with Microsoft and had a lot of MVPs already working at that company. And so I ended up getting into .NET through the second job that I ever had. So we were doing FoxPro development, and then I fell in love with Visual Basic.net. Actually, I hated Visual Basic because I was a FoxPro programmer, but I love .NET and I love VB.net, and because it was object oriented like FoxPro. So I got into .NET at the very, very, very beginning of it, and I guess you could say I never left since then. So I've been, it's 21 years later, for me, because with the alphas and all that stuff. And yeah, I mean, the release of .NET was in 2002, the official release. I remember it. So I think that eventually ending up at Microsoft was sort of like a dream come true for me personally, because I had worked in Microsoft tech for so long and out of college. Of course, there were a lot of challenges along the way. Being a woman in tech at the time in like the early 90s is not easy, right? Like a lot of male-dominated, industry was a little difficult, but we made it. So,
how much better is it right now being a woman in IT compared to the early days?
I have to say that I didn't really, I think I got lucky maybe, and always had good managers, worked for great companies. I don't think I ran into as many challenges, I think, as I potentially could have, or if I did, I didn't really feel like I was. I also though had to learn how to be fairly aggressive. I had to stand up for myself, and I had to make sure that that my opinions were heard. And so I think, but in the group of mostly men that I worked with all my life, I didn't really have too many issues, I think, with the guys that I work with. And honestly, I kind of felt like I was like one of the guys on a lot of times. So, my behavior was a lot like, other programmers that I worked with. I think Microsoft in general, since I've been there the longest, since 2007, has definitely changed in a lot of different ways. There are definitely a ton more women that I work with today than I did in 2007, which is great to see. So the women, it still has a long way to go. There's still not enough women in tech, in my opinion, but it's definitely better than it was. When I moved into marketing 5 years ago, I don't have an MBA, and I never really dreamed myself being in marketing. But at Microsoft, because I market a very technical product, .NET, it's better to teach a programmer marketing than teach a marketer programming, in a way. But when I moved into marketing, that's when I realized that there are many, many, many women, creative, amazing leaders in our organization, I think. And then looking back in just the last 5 years, I see that reflected back in engineering as well. So there's just definitely a lot more women that we work with today than I did before. And so it is encouraging. I think that industry in general, not as much. It still has a long way to go, to be honest.
Yeah. Regarding on being heard and maybe acting a little bit what you said, aggressive. Do you have an advice on how to be heard easier when you're either, when you are a minority in the tech industry, or a more junior person, for example?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes I think it's good to have an ally to make friends, or some sort of like close contact with somebody that is a senior that can help you, especially when you're junior. When you're junior, like having a mentor or having an ally in a meeting can really make a huge difference, because Yeah, minority might just mean like I don't know as much as the rest of the people in the room, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be the color of my skin or whether I'm a woman or a man or whatever. It could just be like I'm the minority because I'm new to the job and I don't even know what's going on right now, right? And so having a buddy or an ally or a mentor can help you navigate almost all situations. And then as you grow, become a mentor, become an ally, and help others. Make sure that when you're having, especially all these online meetings that we have now, the etiquette really should be, if you don't hear from somebody or someone's off camera, make sure you call on them. Hey, do you have an opinion on this? What do you think? And making sure that they're included. So I think it really is it's really like a two-way street on it, honestly. So like the people that are your team really should be inclusive, because the more opinions that everybody has, the better everybody can see a situation more clearly. Now, if you're not in that situation and you don't have an ally in a room, or you don't have an ally, my advice is just to like be yourself. Like, you can't change who you are. The reason why you were hired or you're on the team is because of what you know and like who you are. So don't change who you are. Okay. And if you can't speak up right away because you maybe don't feel comfortable, or you don't think the material as well, or you're afraid because you're feeling threatened in the room, then you need to find a way to communicate like around that, so to the people directly via email, to like maybe email and writing is more your style than speaking. So find what works, communication style works for you the best, but don't shut down. That's my advice. You don't want to be quiet. And that leads to just, you'll end up quitting. You'll end up failing, and you don't want to do that. You want to make sure that you can find a way to break through. And it takes a lot of bravery. A lot of times you have to be brave. You can't, being brave as an ally and being brave as, a person as the minority is the key to, I think.
Yep. Regarding like the mistakes that you did and lessons learned throughout your career, do you have any highlights that you would like to share?
There's been so many of them. I guess mistakes. Yeah, I mean, mistakes happen on a daily basis, pretty much, especially when you're a coder. Like I've made so many mistakes, but it's just a matter of, I think my best advice is I used to be like, as a younger programmer, I felt pretty arrogant, right? I felt like, hey, all my code is perfect. Everything. I mean, I was building a lot of code that, was sold for the business, and it was, making paychecks and I was like, it was great. And I was like the lead, and I got pretty arrogant, I think, around, how I felt about my code. And I also felt like very, I don't know, it was like, I don't know, possession, like it was like my possession. If someone like tested it and found a bug, I feel like devastated and like, what are you doing? It was almost like a piece of art, and then someone was criticizing it, right? That was when I was very young. I learned though that what makes your code better is the testing, is making sure people like tell you what the bugs are, is actually like, so I learned to include like the rest of the software development lifecycle, all the people involved in building the software, and not feeling ownership over every line of code inside of the application. And that was very early on. So it made my coding better. It made my people skills better. And it made me just feel better in general, like not being a control freak, right? I think that was some of the mistakes I made, and then what I realized later on. And so now today, it's like I can easily give up like control over something as long as as long as someone feels very passionate about taking something over. I am more than willing to give them that, because then that helps them grow, right? And it helps them learn. And then just making sure you keep people on the rails is all, a director really is about, directing people, not controlling people, right? So that's probably my best advice.
All right. Do you remember any breakthroughs you had in your career that, like, maybe you read something and that changed the way you thought about some, let's say, development or people or something else? Was there any highlight of like a breakthrough in your career that you consider a big step forward?
Yeah, I think so. When I started speaking, so I started, speaking at conferences and that sort of thing. Like my very first, I was pushed into it. I was pushed into it from the consulting company that I worked for, and they're like, "You really should, give a talk on this thing that you did because you're the expert," kind of thing. And I was very nervous about it because I felt like if not just getting up in front of public speaking, it was more about like, I felt like if I didn't know everything about the topic, I would be called out and I'd get asked a question I wouldn't know and I would freak out, right? And I would just be so scared that would happen. I think I got some advice once. I was like, it was basically like, you don't know everything. You're never going to know everything. Know what you don't know. Okay. And feel comfortable about that. And so when somebody asks you a question that you really don't know, you say, I don't know. Great question. Here's my card. We'll work on it together. Email me, and I'll find out. And once I started to realize like, hey, nobody's ever going to know everything, and feeling comfortable with what you don't know, that's when I think everything started to fall into place for me. I got much more comfortable speaking. I got much more comfortable teaching. And, it just in general, like having conversations with people, like I don't know everything about a topic, but I can still have a meaningful conversation with somebody. Right. So just getting more comfortable with what I don't know.
All right. What about any concept or a piece of theory that you read maybe that shaped you as a programmer, as a professional more? Anything that got stuck to you from that area?
It's been so long since I've coded anything, but so, actually, so more recently, I'd say like in marketing, I've been really interested in storytelling and learning how to tell the right stories, right? So some of the breakthroughs I've had, were really about telling an authentic, truthful story in marketing that's compelling, right? That people will read, that people will listen to, especially in developer marketing, because developers don't like being marketed to. And so I think that over the last 5 years, and I think I took a class on storytelling, and it was really about storytelling of your own life and trying to make it interesting or telling your story in 6 words, those sorts of things are really like choosing the right 6 words about your life. What is really like the 6 words, like about my life. It really helped me streamline what I was talking about, not being too chatty about something, making sure the important points are coming through. So I think that's kind of like more of a career breakthrough that I had, like coming from being a computer scientist and going into marketing. It's really about telling the right story and the right level there. I think the other kind of, I read a book because we work a lot at Microsoft on diversity inclusion at Microsoft. And I read a book called So You Want to Talk About Race. Okay. This book really opened my eyes to some of the challenges, a lot of the challenges that other races have that I do not. Even being a woman in tech is one thing, but being a Black woman in tech is another. And I read this book. I had my husband read this book. I had my parents read this book because it was so enlightening to me, just to bring in the forefront some of the things that other people deal with that I never had to deal with at all. So I think that was another kind of turning point for me when I kind of started really thinking through and trying to be more, I am a better ally because of I reading what other people are going through, like minorities. Okay. I don't consider myself a minority in general at all, maybe in tech, but that is nothing compared to what some of these other groups are dealing with. And, trying to be a better ally for those groups is really what has kind of changed me in the last couple of years.
Okay. Anything in particular that you could mention from that book, that some key points?
Yeah, so I think one of I guess the stories, I think her name is Yoma, what is her name? Yoma Ulu. I think that's her name. And she talks about her life, and she basically she says that, racism is about, not necessarily about like, the people that are blatantly racist. It's about the people that small things every day hit you, right? She says it's like somebody punching your arm in the same spot, not hard, just over and over and over and over and over again in the same spot. And it starts to get really annoying. And then that last punch becomes the icing on the cake, basically. It becomes the tipping point, becomes the point at which someone, says, stop, you're being racist. And you might not have seen that, or you might not have, as being the person who says it, you might not know or think, you might, hey, you're overreacting. That was just something super small. But because they're dealing with something like that every single minute of their lives, we're not seeing that big picture. And so to be very sensitive to people that are hit with those sorts of things every single moment of their day. And I think that sort of made me understand like a lot of like what the struggles are, and a lot of systemic racism that happens, especially in the United States. I'm in the United States. So, it's baked into all of our institutions. Right. So I think that was kind of, one thing that opened my eyes a bit.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Moving on to your part in Visual Basic. So what was your role in Visual Basic when you were in that team?
Yeah, so I started, like I mentioned, in 2007 in a group that was, let's see, at the time was doing like Microsoft Developer Network, and it was like sort of like these online, it was kind of like the birth of blogging and like kind of social networks, a little bit more on the internet in 2007. It was really, blogging was starting to explode. And I managed the Visual Basic Developer Center on Microsoft. I think it was MSDN, Microsoft.com, right? Which I think might be just Docs now, docsmicrosoft.com, but it used to be MSDN, Microsoft.com. And so it was kind of this developer hub. I was hired to come in and kind of revitalize all the content, revitalize the community. I was an MVP. I came from, the community. So, I started I started interviewing MVPs. I started putting them on the website. I started getting more interaction. And yeah, it was really, I started speaking more, in conferences and things like that, and meeting more people. And it actually was a lot of fun. I mean, it was, I can't say my early days at Microsoft was a ton of fun. And just learning kind of the ins and outs of the product as well, like Visual Studio. So I never was like actual, developer on those products. I didn't write code that goes into Visual Studio, thank God. Like I've never written a line of code that's going in Visual Studio. But I got to work with all the engineers that did, and I got to, evangelize. I got to talk about all the features that they, were building. And so at the time, it was a lot of fun. So I had a blog, and, that was my job, is to create content and pull the community together. And then I moved on to more like Visual Studio tools for Office, and more of the Visual Studio tooling team and that kind of thing. So from Visual Basic, and then I kind of came back. Visual Basic was part of like data tools, and like, because Visual Basic was like, kind of a whole, not just the language, but it was the whole entire tooling and ecosystem kind of around it. So we had like a kind of a cool, the VB team type of thing. That was a cool camaraderie, as well as, you know, the community was, I don't know, very passionate and, you know, very helpful. And I think the MVPs at the time were, you know, just fantastic, and we're still good friends, a lot of them. And then I was still on the team. I was on the Visual Studio team for a very long time. I mean, then the C# and VB came together, and languages team was a languages team. And then I went off into just the tools team, and it was more like Visual Studio tools for Office, you know, and SharePoint and Light Switch and like that. Those are more of like the productivity tools. I kind of went more in like that direction than like deep language expert and that kind of thing. So I was more of a practical programmer. I always wrote business software, you know, that kind of thing. So that was just fun. I also did same thing, community management, because at the time we were not open source, right? So we had a lot of PMs, you had a lot of community PMs that were the kind of interacted with the community to bring back the feedback to get the product, like to, you know, what we should do with the product. When .NET went open source, right, in like 2014, that was a big change, for a cultural change for the entire company, well, an entire group, at least, entire developer division. It's like every engineer had to learn how to be a social engineer, right? Everything they did was out in the open now. All the communications like are happening on GitHub, right? You know, and that actually was a big culture shift, because before we'd have a group of people that interacted with the customers and went back to the engineers, and then some engineers were great at communicating and writing blogs and things like that, but the communication channels were not like, you know, GitHub and everything in the open. So I think what happened is, like, I felt like after a while, like, I think I joined marketing in 2015. So I felt like the engineers started getting really good at being those social engineers out in the open, and they didn't really need me anymore. And so I looked at a different challenge, and that challenge was marketing. And because I love .NET so much, I'm in .NET marketing, right? So I'm still close to all of those engineers. It's just like I sit more in the marketing organization now. So that's kind of like my, you know, history at Microsoft and how kind of it happened.
All right. How when you were so you were managing, if I understand correctly, teams surrounding Visual Basic and Visual Studio and tooling and such, right?
So I wasn't managing the teams. I was managing the community interaction. So like I was a community manager, they would call. The community managers are basically like, sometimes they sit in marketing and sometimes they sit in engineering. So a community manager is really more about like interacting with MVPs, going out and speaking, evangelizing. We have a group in Microsoft now called Developer Relations. So that's like a lot of DevRel. I sat on the team itself back in the day, like literally. So I was very close to engineering and could bring back like the feedback right directly. Developer Relations now has a very good relationship with engineering teams, but back in the day, it was, you know, I sat kind of right next to the engineering team. So as a program manager, it's the titles at Microsoft, some probably don't make any sense to people externally. Even though it says manager in the title, doesn't mean I'm a people manager. It means that you're like, you know, a program manager. You're managing projects and the features and the products and things like that. So
there was a series of YouTube videos. I watched a few where you would lead meetings with the VB team, and I think
design,
they would, yeah.
Design team, yeah.
Yeah. So
what was that all about?
Yeah, what was the intention, and was it a success? And overall, do you think VB reached its potential and was a success, or not so much, and why, you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think Visual Basic was a huge success. If we take a look at like the version 1, you know, 2, 3, all like I don't even know, 14, 15 now, VB 15. There's 15 versions of Visual Basic. It's more than C#. I think that's pretty successful. I think I think its initial success was like built, like Bill Gates, like had, a huge hand in Visual Basic. I mean, that was the company was built on developer tools practically, right? We had Windows, we had Visual Basic, we had, Visual C++, we had Visual Studio later, right? So Visual Basic was a huge success. And so I definitely think it was a huge success. But once we went to .NET, we had multi languages. And so, I'm the .NET, I'm .NET marketing. So I don't really care what language you're using, as long as you're using .NET, I'm very happy, right? So I think at the time, there was a lot of argument between which language you should use on .NET. And I always thought that was a kind of irrelevant argument because, that's the same platform, right? It's the same, development platform, .NET. And, F# is also a great language too, right? It's a different, different style. So it's about your style. Now, where we make investments in which languages depends on like the language strategies themselves, okay, and which language you choose for which job. But yeah, I definitely think that Visual Basic was a success. Back in the day, like I was interviewing like the design teams, not just VB, but like there was C# design team, there's a VB team, like so. That was a series of videos I would do, like I forget what I even called them, on Channel 9. So Channel 9 was kind of created to be behind the scenes at Microsoft.
Yep.
So I don't know, if Channel 9 is on, if you're on an airline, if you're on an airplane, you can listen to Channel 9, and Channel 9 is like where the air traffic controllers and all of the pilots talk to each other. Right. So it's like kind of behind the scenes, right, of running the planes. So they named the channel 9 after kind of that. And it really was about behind the scenes of the people at Microsoft building stuff, because we weren't, like, a lot of this stuff wasn't open source at all. So the only way that you got an idea of what was happening back in those days is like if I did these interviews, basically. So it wasn't really managing the team. I was asking them to like go on camera and like, hey, let's do a design meeting out in the open, right? And that's kind of what it was. So I learned a ton later on, like I said, like as we were moving to open source methodologies and putting all our code out in the open and building it in the open. The incredible amount of, we were very humbled by the incredible amount of contributions that we were getting back from the community. So in a way, it was like, why didn't we do this in the beginning? Because people always loved watching those behind the scenes Channel 9 stuff. So of course they want to help contribute and build the product, right? So later on, I realized it was kind of like, why didn't we do this before? It was kind of a revelation, and it was amazing, I think. Definitely amazing.
Do you think, other than publicizing the product and showing it to the community, do you think it helped also in some way the teams themselves, like on a personal level, showing themselves, speaking up, being comfortable with that?
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak for every person, like experiences, but in general, I think it was a big culture shift, right? In general, it was a big culture shift for the company. So the company went from closed source to open source, right, in a matter of like 2 years, really. So it was like with the .NET team, and like we had started, I think Roslyn is the .NET compiler platform for Visual Basic and C#, right? So Roslyn was started internally as closed source, but the intent was to open source it even from the beginning. So even though there was the internal machine of Microsoft, I'm not going to go into details. It was just really hard to do anything out in the open back in those days. So pre 2008, I would say ASP.NET team in 2008, like around then 2012, 8, 10, 12, like right around there, like started releasing ASP.NET framework in the open on Codeplex, right? So they would just kind of drop the code, here's the code, like, and then they started taking contributions later, and then it wasn't until 2014 that we released Roslyn is open source. Okay. So I think Anders Helsberg got on stage and did that at like Build 2014. And then later that year, and that's actually the year that the .NET Foundation was founded in 2014. And then later that year, the .NET platform, like .NET Core, basically, was like, I think one library or something like that, but, was released as open source, and we started building that in the open. And that's when we started getting so much contributions. I mean, even today, .NET, the .NET project on GitHub is one of the top, 20 highest velocity open source projects on GitHub, meaning that the number of pull requests and issues coming in, right? So it's up there. It's up there with like Kubernetes and Linux, and so like, well, maybe not up there, but like it's pretty far out there. So it's just it did cause a huge culture shift, because when you have that many people coming from the outside wanting to contribute, now you need to, we need to have processes in place for, resolving conflict, code of conduct enforcements, like, PR, even just reviewing PRs and getting people to be able to build the thing was really a challenge, right? So I'm super proud of the entire .NET team, especially during those times of really making that shift from closed to open. And it's a pretty big culture change. And I think it's been going as well as we possibly could think it did. Like, I don't know, like I said, why we didn't do it earlier. I kind of know why, but I don't think it was a technical reason why. It was more of a political reasons.
That's awesome. I think .NET is doing great, going in a really cool direction. I personally love it a lot, working with it and also popularizing it as much as I can.
I mean, I think the history of programming languages in general, like even back in the day, I mean, you used to have to buy compilers and things like that. I mean, that's just not the reality of the world today, right? So like, a lot has happened in the last 20 years, right? Or 25 years, right? So you don't buy languages and compilers, right? At all. They should all be open source and free. So the world has changed, and, Microsoft had to change with it.
Right. Regarding the community itself, if you had the tools or the technology that is right now available for you, back when you started popularizing and being a community person, what would you have done differently given the tools and technology we have right now?
I see. Yeah. I mean, I think, right, because back when I started, blogging was just starting, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, but I also feel like developers have always been very social. Like even before the internet existed, we had bulletin boards, and we had the BBS, we had Usenet, we had ways of communicating. And then the internet was born. We had forums, and that, like the way that like I mentioned, I was so impressed with the community helping me, and the way that the community helped me is literally I would go on BBS and I would ask a question, and then I would log off and then log back on the next day and go see if it was answered.
Yes.
Right. Okay. And so I think we got, like what was the world like before cell phones? Like, did people even survive? Of course they did. Like, I mean, I don't know, like what I would do differently with the technology I had today back then, because I think it's more about people. It's really, community is about people. It's about people. It's about a common cause. It's about, bringing people together for, some sort of commonality, right? What does that mean? Like, I'm a Visual Basic developer and I have questions and, I need help, or, bringing people together. I think the technology is very secondary to that. People always want to communicate. They always want to help each other. They always want to learn. And the tools that we have today, sometimes hurt. All this social media noise, we didn't have to deal with that back then. Things were much more, you had to go to one site, for even before Stack Overflow existed, you went to one site to get an answer. Like, all the experts would probably be over there, so you would know where to go. Now it's like, it's almost harder, in a way, to be heard and to ask questions. So there's always something new. There's always a new developer community popping up. There's always, like, keeping track of all of that on the internet is actually rather tough. So I think back in, I don't know, like 1990-ish or so, Microsoft created the MVP program for a reason, right? It was to bring these experts from all over the world together because they're experts in the product, but they're also helping the community in their communities, okay? And so community is all about people. It has nothing to do with the technology you use to utilize those communications. Yeah.
That's right. When you have a strong why and know why you do it, the how becomes just a detail and it comes out naturally. Yeah.
Correct. Good way to put it.
Have you ever dealt with imposter syndrome yourself or helped anyone else deal with it?
That's funny because we actually were having a discussion about that at Microsoft like a couple weeks ago or maybe a month ago. Everybody has imposter syndrome at some point, you know, everybody does. I mean, even if it's like, you know, you can actually go back to like I think the worst cases of imposter syndrome for me were in high school, right? It's like everybody in high school is an imposter of something, you know, you're like fake it till you make it, and that kind of thing happens constantly in your career, of course. But it's not a negative, you know, it's not necessarily a negative. You know, imposter syndrome is really like not feeling confident enough to, you know, handle a situation. So you kind of fake it till you make it, right? It's kind of natural. It's a natural progression in like just an experience, right? So for sure, I've had imposter syndrome constantly, especially at Microsoft. I work with like brilliant people every day. Sometimes I'm just amazed that I'm even here, you know, like I'm talking with like Don Syme, language designer of F#, and we're just having a chat, and I'm just sitting here going, wow. Like, I can't believe I'm sitting here, right? Like these amazing, brilliant people. But you know, I'm here. Just remember, like, you know, you're here, you're in your spot for a reason, because you are smart, you are, you know, you are capable, right? And you should feel confident, and you know that you're there for, you know, I'm at Microsoft because, you know, they hired me. They felt that I was worthy. So so if when I start to feel a little bit like, okay, I really have to kind of fake my way through this conversation, you also have to remember that you don't know everything, right? Nobody knows everything. And to make sure that, just make sure you're listening and learning all the time. And then you'll get, you know, then you won't have imposter syndrome anymore in that subject. It'll be something else.
Yep, that's right. To me, things like insecurity and thinking whether you'll succeed or not is, in the end, just a distraction. And like thoughts like this is just a bump in the road that you should really, all you should do is focus on doing your best, and that's all that matters, really.
Yeah, do your best, fail fast and learn from it. And you know, the older you get, the more experience you get, the wiser you get. You know, it's not just older, but it's just the more experiences that you have, and just make sure that you're getting in front of as many experiences as possible.
That's right. So you said that your first job was around, like you stick to it for around 6 years. Do you
Yeah.
think for a beginner programmer, do you think it's more healthy to change workplaces like early on, like not sticking to the same workplace for, let's say, 2 years or more, or do you think it could be healthy to stick in the same workplace for a long time? And I'm talking about like specifically the very first workplace that you start, maybe the one that isn't the best, but yeah. What are your thoughts about the first workplace? Do you think it's healthy moving between them?
I mean, well, for me, I just looked at the fact that I was being rewarded, I was getting promoted, they valued my work. So I stayed until that company got bought, and then they didn't value our work anymore, and they laid us off. So I stayed because you stay because you feel like your work is valued. That's what I say. I mean, like, I'm not the type of person that's going to leave just because I'm, I don't know, want to try something new all the time. I also, at the same time, you don't want to stagnate. So if you feel like your work isn't being valued, or you're really bored and really an opportunity comes your way that's going to accelerate, that's when you take it. So I think it just depends. I don't think there's a cut and dry answer to this at all. It just depends on who you're working for, whether or not you're being rewarded how you feel like you should be, right? Based on how much work you're doing, right? So like if you're overworked, then that's a good reason to leave too. If you're really bored and not being rewarded for the things that you're working on, that's another reason to look. But I wouldn't move unless you feel like it's the next step in, your career. I've always loved, like I said, I actually like close-knit, teams. Even at Microsoft, we're a giant company, but we have nice, good, kind of family-oriented teams. We feel like a family. I feel like I got brothers and sisters that are like, like we fight a lot and like argue and listen, but we still listen and we understand. And the longer you work with a team, the more you feel like that family. So I think over my first job I did, I definitely felt like there was a family oriented, and actually it was a family owned business. So the mom and the father, like the mom was the CEO, the father was the head of sales, and the son was the director of development. So like I literally worked for a family, but I mean, we felt like very belonged, and what was great is they rewarded us. They made sure we had, I remember Christmas bonuses and parties, and like just they brought us together. So that's another reason you need to, evaluate, your career versus, like your happiness, like you want to be happy and you want to have a full career. So you always have to balance those two things.
That's very true. Regarding people hiring and recruitment, if you were to hire people only based on their behavior, not their skill, but their behavior, would you say there is one defining quality that sticks out and is above all others that you would hire people based on?
So like a trait, like a
yeah.
Okay. I think in general, if you're open to other ideas and listening skills and communication skills, listening and communicating, I think are like the two really big things. Like anybody, like I think in any industry, you'd want somebody to listen really well and also be able to communicate. I think that those are like the basics. When it comes to, like actually we're trying to hire somebody right now. So what I'm looking for is curiosity. A lot of times when I'm looking for like programming, I'm looking for curious. Like I want somebody to be very curious about something. Not necessarily that you got to know everything, but I'm interested in how you learn. And I like to see that curiosity and excitement especially in more junior level people. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. And is there anyone in tech industry that you yourself look up to?
Oh, wow. I mean, there's a lot of people I look up to actually, like that I just work with, Amanda Silver and Scott Hunter are two of the people I really look up to within, developer division. I mean, like there's, Chris Capicella is our chief marketing officer. I really look up to him as well, because there's a lot of just stuff that, he does that doesn't seem like marketing at all. It's really more about our culture and really guiding us on how to be one Microsoft and like what kind of values that the company really, has. And I don't know. I think that there's a lot of stuff that our leadership I look up to within Microsoft. Outside of Microsoft, I don't know. I actually have like, I love sports. So like I look up to, some pitchers on the A's team, and, like Derek Carr is my favorite quarterback. And just, I look up to some of those guys just because it's like, they're in a totally different industry and they deal with a lot of different challenges and like how, they're famous, I guess. But I think my biggest hero is probably my mother. My mom's my biggest hero for sure. She got me, like, she's a teacher, and so she recognized that I was into programming when I was a little kid. And teachers don't make much money. My dad also is a refinery worker, so they don't make much money, but they stretched to buy me a computer. And they bought me an Amiga 2000. I wanted Amiga so bad. And but it had like an IBM motherboard in it, so I could actually do Amiga stuff, and I could do like I could code and things like that. So she like was my inspiration, and kind of like helped me really, like, pushed me to go to college, pushed me to be a computer science major, and then pushed me to get my first job, right? So definitely owe my mother like my entire career.
That's so sweet. Nice. Um, I always wondered actually how did people learn back in those days? Like, you had like a really like way less sources for finding stuff, way less people to help you. So like, what would you do when you were stuck back in those days when your code wouldn't work? Simply put, what would be your go-to?
Yeah, so there was a lot of books. Read a lot of books. There actually was a lot of printed material out there back in the day. I learned Clipper through, like, I think the Nantucket manual. Like, it was like a manual you'd flip through, and you'd be like, oh, what's that line of code? I know it's over here somewhere. And then you're like, oh, that's it. It was more trial and error. The BBSs, like I mentioned, the internet did exist when I graduated college. So there was forums that we went to a lot that answered a lot of questions. So it wasn't that bad. I'm like that old, but yeah, I mean, I still have a lot of books on my shelf even. So, a lot of experts wrote, still today, I think there's still some books being written today, but I think there was a lot more reliance on, buying a book at, Barnes and Noble or whatever it was back then, and reading the whole thing and then tackling your programming project. I hated reading though. I really didn't like reading that much at all. So I, preferred just kind of glancing at the code, like reading a little bit and then tinkering and playing with stuff back and forth. But I think that the other thing was just really good, mentors and managers and coworkers that were more experienced than me. So going and like coming in with a project, and I really don't understand what's happening. Can you help me? And they're like, oh yeah, let's take a look. And that was sort of just what I got through a lot of the first initial like jobs that I was just working with great people that were willing to help you. So yeah, I'd say books and the coworkers were probably my most effective back then. Now you can look up anything pretty much on the internet.
That's right. Unless you work with really legacy stuff, like something really old.
Oh yeah, right. It's true. Like Fortran, I got to get the book out. Yeah,
Yep. Yep. I was very curious about what made you realize that you prefer more of a community stuff and marketing rather than programming, and how does that compare?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Because I ask myself like almost every week whether or not I like, if I miss it. I do. So let's put it this way. I do get to write some code. I mean, I build websites, I tinker with stuff. I play with the product. I mean, it's a technical marketing position I have. So I got to go in there and make sure the product's working and things like that. Or like, at least I understand at a high level what's going on. I think .NET is such a broad platform. You can build anything with .NET, and there's a lot of things I could focus on and go deep on and become an expert in. I think what I enjoy being the storyteller for the entire platform, I enjoy being more look across like the platform, look across the business, look across the ecosystem, see where our opportunities are in the future, like at a higher level. And I really do, and I think I enjoy that. And the storytelling, like I mentioned, like simplifying what is .NET in 6 words, like that's the kind of things I actually enjoy doing that. Making it easier making it easier to understand to people on the outside. That is very complicated, but it doesn't have to be initially, right? Like, just depends on how you present it. So I think that that's kind of more what I enjoy. I do enjoy being a little more heads up, and a little more high level, and kind of looking across the business and seeing where, what I can focus. I can literally focus on things for a few weeks and then move on to another area of the platform. So I'm never bored. You're never bored in marketing. Marketing is like bulls landing in your lap half the time, but you could also, there's also so much creativity as well. So I think that, I like, we're working on like a magazine right now, and like I get to design t-shirts and stickers and like, all kinds of fun pins and patches and like, all kinds of things. That's like the fun part of the job too. So I can't see myself, particularly like, sort of like, I'm sort of coming to the end of my career, really. I don't feel like I could go back and be super heads down and code anymore and feel fulfilled. Let's put it that way at this stage of my career. Let's put it that way.
Is there anything you miss though in programming? Like,
Yeah, I mean, I love solving problems. So like, I mean, when I'm hacking together code that I'm like just trying to get to work, I actually really enjoy that, or building a website, or I don't really enjoy Bootstrap very much, but other than that, a JavaScript, but like, if I'm trying to like, if I'm building something, I do enjoy building things. So that kind of thing I do, and solving problems. But I solve problems in different ways now. But I feel like I've created something. I feel like, oh, this is my website. So that makes me proud. Yeah, and if even if it's just demos and stuff like that, sometimes I'm like happy that I even did that. So I kind of miss that. I kind of miss the actual, typing on the keyboard and building something F5 and it actually works.
yep. Um, do you remember, or do you have any advice given to yourself that stuck to you and would like to share with others? Like overall, it doesn't have to be career programming.
Yeah, there's like, I guess a lot of advice depending on what you look. I mean, the one I mentioned before is know what you don't know. I would say that's good advice in general. Then, depends on the situation, but you always try to hear everybody's point of view before. It's really hard, especially for me and my family, because we're Italian and we're always talking over each other, but like try and hear other people's point of view before before you make a final decision on something, so that like you have the voices of everybody inputted before you make a final decision. That's more business related, I mean, I've got relationship advice, I've got all kinds of stuff, but I think for the purposes of this interview, I think it's safe to just stick with like on the job type advice. Just, yeah, try not to be too arrogant about stuff. It's hard when you're a hotshot programmer, I think. Just try and listen a little bit more, and give back. If you're the hotshot programmer, help someone else become a hotshot programmer too.
That's a very good advice. Yep. Would you like to say anything else? Final words about maybe .NET, about yourself, your contacts, references, if you have any?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, you can follow me on Twitter. It's just at Beth Massi, BethMassi. And don't miss November 9th is going to be the launch of .NET 6 and .NET Conf. Right now, there's an open call for content. So if you want to submit a session, please do. Sessions will be submitted. We accepted through September 13th. So just go to .NETconf.net and you get all the information there.
Thank you very much. It has been a fun interview with you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.